going to go ahead and get this meeting started. You're hereby notified that a workshop meeting at the City Commission is called to be held at the regular meeting place of the City Commission at City Hall 201 North 2nd Street in the city of Palatka to begin at 4 p.m. on Thursday, August 30th. The purpose of the workshop meeting is to discuss the terms of the conditions of the proposed water taxi and dock operations service agreement with Palatka Boathouse Marina LLC. Please govern yourselves accordingly. At this time, we're going to have our invocation and pledge. Mr. Holmes, if you could lead us in the invocation, and Ms. Triggers, if you could lead us in the pledge.
Please bow, please. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity of coming with you today, gathering together in freedom and working for the best interest of the citizens that we all serve. We'd ask that you guide us and direct us in a way that's pleasing to you, and that you be mindful, help us be mindful of the needs of all people in our community. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mayor Terrell Hill.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mary Lawson Brown. Commissioner Rufus Gorham.
Present.
Commissioner Justin Campbell.
Present.
Commissioner Tammy McCaskill.
Here.
All members are present and accounted for, and you have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now open the floor for public comment. Is there anyone here for public comment? Seeing no one, we'll close public comment. Moving the agenda forward, item number 2, water taxi and dock operations service agreement with Palatka Boathouse Marina. Mr. Holmes, Mr. Griffith, Mr. Lagacy, Ms. Curry. So, Mr. Griffith, well, I guess so we probably don't need an introduction to this issue at all. At last step, there were a lot of things that needed to be discussed as it pertains to this agreement. And I guess the easiest way is Mr. Griffith, do you have you guys set up kind of how we wanted to work the workshop?
Can you address that, Mr. Holmes? Or you?
Sure. Go ahead.
Mayor, Commissioners, staff had a discussion a couple days ago regarding format and what we believe the best thing to do, and Mr. Holmes distributed a discussion points memorandum just prior to the meeting. These are the contract provisions that we think are the most pertinent to this conversation today. I believe, and if I forget something, Mr. Holmes, please correct me, it's the length and term of the agreement, the right to terminate, the agreement grants PBM exclusive authority, so we want to talk about the park operating area and define that. Thank you. Expense sharing and revenue sharing, and I believe that is it. Excuse me, I left off one of the important ones. Capping the expenses to the city on an annual basis.
I want to ask a question. The use of the public dock, do we have that in there?
It's in there. It's part of that write-up.
I just want to make sure that...
that document where they say we're going to use a portion of one side. That is.
The answer is yes, Commissioner. We're not basically stopping the public from having access to the dock. But I think we'll specifically cover that under item number 2, which is the proposed area of operation.
Right.
So the first item is the cost cap for the city.
So what we did is just a suggestion for talking points. We aren't attempting to necessarily steer the commission in any particular direction, but we have the agreement. There was a lot of discussion about it, and we tried to get together and talk about from the discussion what we thought might be the points that seem to be of the greatest concern. And our listing was, as Jonathan said, the length or term of the agreement, which is 21 years. the right of PBM to terminate the agreement upon 90 days notice to the city without cause, the absence of any right of the city to terminate the agreement unless PBM breaches the agreement, the grant to PBM of exclusive authority to conduct various operations within the park operating area, which would include most recreational activities, equipment rentals, etc., and the net cost to the city. Those were the kind of what we thought were the big areas of concern. You might have a different one. And so it was our belief that those are kind of all interrelated. In other words, if you change one of those, then it might make another one of those of less concern. For instance, if there was a cost cap on what the city might end up spending each year, then that might make the city more comfortable in agreeing to a longer term. If the PBOA, which is the park operating area, the POA, if it was defined and you knew where it was and you could feel that you weren't basically giving PBA, you weren't giving Palatka boat, what is it, PBM, I'm sorry. You weren't giving PBM your entire waterfront, then that might give you more comfort with the exclusivity issue. So what we just tried to do was give you some suggestions and thoughts. Jonathan put together a map that I think you all should have. I hope you have. It's a color-coded map. And he just drew some lines around some areas and said, okay, for right now, let's call this the POA, Park Operating Agreement. The POA would be the area over which Palatka Boathouse Marina has exclusive control. Now, you can put those lines wherever you want to. When you build a house, sometimes you start with a blueprint and then you start moving walls. So we just put you something in paper and said, okay, here's the starting point. You guys decide what you're comfortable with. With regard to the cost, we talked a lot about cost, and Logan and Jonathan put together a city finance proposal that's in your packet to show what they projected the city expense to be for the first 5 years. It ranges from 69 in the first year to 62 in the last. Actually, the low, I guess, is 59 in the second year. But that's the number, and so it was. Those are estimates. We can't guarantee those numbers. No one else can either, I don't think. So we thought, well, if the city agreed to take on certain types of expenses, like cleaning the restrooms, which PBM has asked us to do anyway, boat insurance. If we said we're going to take those on, whatever they cost us, but then the cap that the city's going to pay out of pocket, other than that, is going to be X, whatever you guys decide. Then for budgeting purposes, you have a number to work with. And if you have that number, then, and that number is one that you tolerate, then you might look at that as being a number that you're paying as a cost of providing an amenity to the citizens and the public. And then the length of the agreement may not be as significant to you. We also thought about the length of the agreement. If the agreement was for 7 years, for instance, and at the end of that time there was some provision for renegotiation, and those options for renegotiation are many. You could do a lot of different things. Then that might be something for you to think about. Or you may say 21's great. Again, it's not for us to decide. But we just thought some talking points might help you, and so we put those together, Ms. Driggers, Jonathan, and Logan, and myself, and if they're benefit to you, great, and if they're not, then hopefully we didn't harm anything except kill a few trees.
Mayor Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
Long before any of you all got here, I know Betsy, were you here when we did this? Oh, well, I think that Tim Swift was mayor, and the idea for the vote was one we came up with when we did a thing to try to get a big grant that we didn't get, but it gave us points to get other grants. We got 25 points more on other grants for 10 years. It was an empowerment zone application that we worked on. And the vote was supposed to be the thing to help draw tourists here. I brought it up and brought information back and asked the commission to please let me work to see if we could do it. And I agreed to work to find a grant to get the boats. It was supposed to be 2. And that it would not, they told me fine, it would not be any cost to the city for it to operate, but it would bring tourism, and we would let the persons use the boat, only paying money to have it taken out and cleaned or whatever they have to do, so that it was no expense to the city. Over a period of years, when we got new city managers, nobody ever came back to talk to us except they asked could they change the style of one of the boats, because if it went down to Palatka and Crescent City. The grant was not really to take trips down to Crescent City and Palatka. We thought that might have been a plus to help other cities, and we agreed to do it. We also sit down and agreed that we would do it by reservation only, so that a person, whoever ran it, would not have to work a captain and a mate all the time. And we were not supposed to have any expense to the city. I was of the opinion that when the RFP went out, which I don't remember anybody talking to the commission about, that it was for somebody to operate the boat at no expense to the city. I don't want us to take on something that'll be like the golf course. The boat, they said it would be hard to make money off of the boat, but we have people that have been using that boat for the last, I don't know, has it been here 2 years or 3 years? And it seems like people want to use it. And I formed a nonprofit called Pride of Palatka, and we went out and found the grant money. We got 3 boats given to us. We only got 1 boat back, and we've got none of the boats that were given to us back, because you all know it's going through legal stuff. And I cannot see us giving away our waterfront, our downtown. I think we owe it to our citizens for that building to be where they can use restrooms, because we don't have it, and that activities can be done there. I think that since they didn't want a big restaurant in there, that we could have had areas that had kiosks in it, and they could have sold food to people and brought people down there when they wanted to sit around and do stuff on the waterfront. And I do not want to see us give away the city property, and especially for 20-some years. It's not fair to the commissioners that come behind us.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Well, based on that little write-up, they delineated one area as it relates to the boat ramp. They talked about the specific, I guess, the floating docks that they were going to only restrict those.
Those docks, some of those docks were paid for with the money we got with the boat. And what it was is the city managers we had never ever sat and talked to any of us about what our plans or duties were for that waterfront. We did at one time when Tim Smith was here, we went to Palmetto, Florida, where they had a marina, and looked at the marina, and I was talking to, I can talk to Allegra, but we remember people did not want us to have a marina there at that time. They raised hand, and I know times change, and we have to change with times sometimes and pick the best things for us and do them to get people to do them. But the boat was supposed to be taken care of at no expense to the city, and I promised when I got the money it was $1,219,000 for the boat. We even did research to know that the schools would bring kids over, that they could do it with reservations to do it, so it wouldn't have to be funded that much. We looked at somebody who worked with travel agencies that they could do elder house. We did a whole list of work to make sure that there was enough activity to do it, and we were really pushing to get tourism. It's another city that has had 26 businesses coming there because they had a riverboat that was coming up and down the river. And I really want you all to think about it. I don't want to see us give that away.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But again, they do have it delineated. That's one of the things that we
Hold on 1 second.
It's rebooting right now.
Oh,
Let's take a break until the computer comes back on. No difficulties. Again, I want to thank Vice Mayor Brown for giving us some background information. Mr. Lagacy, you want to continue the history lesson?
Sure. Do I need to get my name and address?
Of course.
Scott Legacy, 135 Middle Point Lane, East Palatka. Thanks for accommodating my tardiness. I was actually sitting in the car waiting for it to rain. I was 5 minutes late before that, so. And I think if I could just take 5 minutes here and clarify some of the history, I think it's important. And in support of what Ms. Mary is saying, my involvement was back when the city first started, decided to do a marina type concept. And I think you guys have all heard that story. And I came to 2 city commission meetings and protested, got involved because I thought I'd be the best person, since we already have a marina, the best person to make this work for the city. And the RFP came out, we responded to the RFP, we were chosen. And so the guidelines of everything we did were based around the RFP. On my proposal, the Mike Zibor contract is still the one we're using. Jonathan's been the constant through all of that, so I think he could certainly verify how we got to where we're at. Through the process, though, I think my first major involvement, besides the building, design, docks, was with the boats. And through the process of responding to the RFP, we had to do a lot of due diligence. And one of the biggest concerns in the RFP was the demands of the RFP for the use of the boats. And if I could, I'll just read a couple sentences from the original RFP. But it says the city of Palatka is seeking a qualified operator to provide a United States Coast Guard certified captain and crew to operate 2 49-passenger water taxis on the St. Johns River between Palatka and various points on the St. Johns River, Palatka, Crescent City, Murphy Island, Dunn's Creek, State Park, Buckham Lock, other destinations needed. And you go to the end of the paragraph, it says service routes, and it says Palatka twice weekly, Palatka to Crescent City once weekly, and the others are all twice or once weekly. My point to that is I just want to make it clear that I in no way ever was involved in changing the direction of the use of the boats, except for when asked by the city. The city came to me, Jonathan and Michael, and said, what would you do? We've got one boat that's being completed now, and they're going to start the second one at some point in time, we think. And we'd already worked the numbers on making those routes, and it just wasn't physically possible. The boats would take 7 hours to make round trips to those areas. At that point, I got involved and said, the best thing to do is I would suggest you get your money back from that builder, so that you don't need a second boat that won't make it to Palatka and to Crescent City within a couple hours. The boats were capable of going. The design of the boat, prior to Palatka 1, the design, according to naval engineers, is that the boat would not go more than 7 knots. So to fast forward, Michael Zembor and Jonathan asked me to put together my best case scenario of how, this was after we were chosen as RFP, of how we could operate the boats at a profit. And I do believe right now the pilot Palatka 2 will carry itself. It's a great concept. It'll work. It doesn't work as a water taxi on a designated route based on our numbers. You can't set a designated route. It has to go from Palatka to Crescent City twice a week. And if you get 20 people on there at $20 a head or $25 a head, it won't even cover the captain, the first mate, and the fuel. So at that time, they asked me to join them for a meeting in Jacksonville with the FDOT, where it was quite a group of people, and the discussion was to get the FDOT to allow us to change the usage of the boats to on demand, or to use them as eco-tour style boats. And Jonathan can give you all the details of that, but that was my real involvement in changing anything, that Ms. Mary, that you had laid out.
Okay, but I wanted to tell you, we understood that those boats moved slower. And he came back to us, Seymour came back and said that if we went to Crescent City, it was supposed to be only for special occasions, like they had the Catfish Festival or something down there. The boats were to bring tourism to Palatka. Mr. Simbor did not sit down and ever talk to any of us. Allegra's back there too, she can tell you. He never talked to any of us about what we wanted. We had done research. We had gone out with the people from the state park, had taken us out, taken us over to Dunn's Creek to see where a dock would be built. The Water Management District people took us to Murphy Island, and they were happy. They even wanted a dock on the other side. We looked for ways to make the boat work without going that far or doing it just on a route here. And for the other places, on special occasions, they would get a boat in those places. But I think the misunderstanding came that the city manager came in and decided what he wanted to do without ever talking to anybody on the city commission. We worked on this thing not for a few years, but we worked on this thing. It took 10 years for me to find the money and for him to bring it here. And it took another 10 years almost for us to get the boat. But that boat is supposed to be to bring tourism to the city of Palatka first. As you work with it and it got where it could carry itself, then to go to the other places. I went with them to the waterworks people and waterways people and to DOT, and we had to write a definite, I got all those things of what we wrote up that we had to do in a box somewhere. I just got so much stuff in my house I can't find it. But nobody really had a good understanding to give to you all what that boat should do. And I think now that we're sitting here, you need to understand that when we went out and I talked to Senator Nelson, Senator Graham, Congresswoman Brown, Congressman Micah approached me. They thought it was a terrific idea to help us do tourism here. If they didn't think it could make it, they wouldn't have ever pushed for us to get those dollars and cents.
But as you fast forward, and we only got a limited amount of time to kind of go through, but as you fast forward to today, it's all about the 2013 RFP, which is what we're bound by. I mean, the historical.
So why are we bound by it? And
let me finish first. And so, what we're bound by, because the RFP has been accepted. There was an award based upon what was in place in the ranking, and where we are is in the contract negotiations based upon what was in that RFP. Now, what we're here to do today is to look at the items that are contained within an RFP, within the proposal for the contract that we have, to see if there is a way that we can negotiate in good faith to find a common ground of if there are points that can be put into place. We can't go back and change what happened 20 years ago, because what we're bound by is what the commission in 2013 went by. Doesn't mean that we lock ourselves in. If there are things that you're uncomfortable with, this will be one of the times that we discuss those things. But we can't go back and...
We did not agree to that in 2013.
Somebody agreed to it, it passed, and it went out for bid, and there was an award. And so where we are today is there's a contract negotiation in place. And that contract negotiation, we're in the middle of this contract negotiation. There are parameters set forth in the RFP as it relates to concessions, as it relates to as it relates to the operating area, as it relates to how the boat is going to be operated, how certain services are going to be provided. What I want us to do is make sure we have that perspective when there are appropriate times for us to look back at what things may be feasible from past conversations. We can see if there are ways to interject that into what's there on the table. But I want us to be mindful that we're looking at the proposal that's before us, the proposed contract before us, and also the scope that's defined within that RFP. Would you agree with that, Council?
Well, I definitely would, and not to belabor the point, but I think that Jonathan would tell you that the general parameters were actually part of the grant terms. So, and I wasn't part of the grant application, and that would have been before 13 by a long ways, wouldn't it?
2002 is, I think, when we got the first money.
So 2002, the grant parameters were established, and they did require the boat to go from Palatka to Crescent city as a water taxi. That predates, that's a long time ago, obviously. Now, they were successful in going back to the state and the feds and getting them to agree to modify that requirement because, as Mr. Legassi said, trying to run that boat to Crescent City and back twice a week or whatever many times a week, there was just no way anyone could see that it would be break even at all. So they did modify the terms of the grant, but some of the parameters that are in the RFP basically were dictated by the conditions under which the grant was received. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, you're pretty much knowledgeable about that grant, is that not correct?
Yes, sir.
So it isn't something that somebody made up in 13 with the RFP. Some of those terms in that RFP were terms that they were the conditions under which the city got the money.
No, we had to go back and forth to the waterways people and to DOT a number of times to try to get it worked out so that we could get the boat and get it operating.
So I definitely agree with the mayor in that. The city put out an RFP. The responses were considered. I think there were two, but I believe that's correct. The responses were considered, and is that not right?
There's two.
The responses were considered, and it was determined that Mr. Legassi's group was the most acceptable response to the city, and so that was the basis of us beginning the negotiations. But then trying to work out the details has been problematic because of the numbers, and added to that is the fact that everybody is having to make guesses. You can call them predictions or forecasts if you want to, but the plain word form is guesses. Guesses on how many people are going to ride, guesses on how much you're going to be able to charge, guesses on what it's going to cost you to run, to pay the captain and a mate, guesses on what the maintenance is going to be. You can make educated guesses, but there's a lot of guesswork going on here. So it isn't an easy process from either side. I will agree to that. Matter of fact,
and we don't slight the history because I think the history gives us all real perspective as to what this thing, and lack of any other term, has kind of morphed into. You know, at one point we were talking restaurant and liquor license and all those other things, and we've gone past that point to where we are today. And it's continued to adjust, for lack of any other term, based upon whatever conditions were presented. But today we're here with a proposed agreement in place, and we didn't want to get too far in the weeds before, but this is the time that we need to start to have more detailed conversations. I don't know if time is going to allow us. We've got roughly 35 minutes or so to begin to talk about really some of the critical components. You have much more history.
I just want, because I think it's important that this set of commissioners and the city knows a couple of other quick things. I felt like at the last meeting, I was pretty frustrated when I left, I'll be honest with you. I'm here to try to help the city and to try to help grow the riverfront and help my business that's established that we want to expand. I can, but I'm not going to expand our marina operation currently at the boathouse until we know what's going to happen on the city's property. It wouldn't make sense for me to duplicate what the city's going to do. So the sooner we get, I've been trying to get this done for several years. I've been through 3 city managers, an interim city manager or 2, and I just want to get an answer somewhere so I can move forward on my business, if not working with the city. And so just so you guys know, and I'll make it really quick, and Jonathan can verify or not verify anything I run through quickly here, and I'm happy to take any questions. But from the boat process, went into helping with building design. I went to multiple architectural design meetings and the initial building. It was going to be on the waterfront in Jacksonville. That was going to be, when we did the RFP, the concession operation was going to be of a size enough that we quoted the city certain numbers that we were going to pay the city based on having approximately 35 seats in the restaurant. We weren't allowed to call it restaurant concessions, but we based it off of 35 seats there. Now, we'd be lucky to get, 12, if you try to open a concession operation there. So that changed the numbers for us. There was a lot of involvement there. That at one point, as you guys all was, I don't remember the number, $33,000 a year per employee or something, I don't know what it was, that
35.
that the city was going to pay if I would guarantee more employees, 15 employees. I don't remember what the number we ended up guaranteeing was, but I had to stick my neck out for that. And that ended up being a big Scott roast by the time it was over with, because the restaurant operator that we chose wasn't the right guy. It turns out he just didn't. For whatever reason, that ended up being bad. All I did is I hired consultants to pick a restaurant guy, and it ended up that way. I'm just telling you, that was a long process that I went through trying to do what was best for the city. So from that, we went into, I've helped with the dock designs, or the layout. I won't say that it's actual design, but I've been involved with Jonathan and all that. We changed the contract many, many times, but the core of it, with the terms, some of the exclusivity I'd like to touch on, I think that gets us to where we can start solving the problems. We never requested to be responsible for the entire riverfront. That was a demand on by the RFP. Mike was on board, Jonathan was involved in that. The POA area was from the end of the city's property by the ramps all the way to almost the bridge. We were responsible to maintain and oversee that area. Never once have I said that we've got to have exclusivity to that whole area. It's more responsibility than I would want to do in the first place, and that's been another cost to us. We've got to find a way to pay for this. The boats, as I was saying, Ms. Mary, Palatka 1 will pay for itself, and it will do more than that, given just a little bit of time. But it won't pay for an employee to be in the ship store area for 63 hours a week, which is currently what is asked for the RFP, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., 7 days a week. That's approximately $12 an hour, and I could be off $1,000 or $2 here, but by the time you pay all the governmental things that go along with it, it's somewhere close to $40,000 a year just in somebody having to be on site. Now, there was, with a 35-seat concession operation, there was going to be revenue there to cover that pretty easily, but the boat's not going to be able to pay for that, one boat by itself. If you put fuel in, there's some, and I've done the pro formas, and I've provided the city the spreadsheets, and I'm happy to provide it to anybody that doesn't have it. We have an active, workable pro forma that includes every potential revenue stream, and you can easily change any of the numbers or the factors in there from employees to revenue and see what it does to the bottom line. So it's difficult when you take away the concession operation. So your revenue streams then go to the Palatka 1. It goes to canoes and kayaks, which I need to purchase myself. It goes to rental boats, any other kind of activities that we can create on the riverfront. You're not going to make much off of the fuel. We've shown those numbers, and you lose money. If I can just quickly, and I'll let somebody else talk. But the major cost of operation is that at least one employee has to be there 8 to 5, 7 days a week. If you're going to be doing something like fuel, you're going to need a second person if you're doing anything inside, like if you're running a ship store, you're running a concession operation, anything like that. So that's going to require a second employee. The other costs are that city restrooms there are going to be heavily used. Somebody has to clean those every couple of hours. You can't just ignore them. You really need to check on them every hour, because that would be poor representation for the city. I don't see us being able to clean those once a day and representing the city properly. The ramps, the boat ramps are great to have, but they don't produce revenue to the person that's there. If you're talking about bass tournaments, those most times, and don't take this wrong, I'm glad we're able to do those, but from an operator standpoint, I know fishermen, my brother's one, he fishes a lot of those tournaments, they get their fuel at the cheapest place they can get it. And marina fuel, by the time you have fuel at a marina, it's going to be about 80 cents a gallon more than at a handyway. So they're going to get their ice, their fuel, they stock up, they do all that early in the morning, they launch the boats, park their boats and trailers there, and they're not going to be spending any money at your facility there. But it ties up all the ramps. So I'm just pointing these challenges out for a business that's got to have a way to pay for what the city requires. And that's maintenance on the docks to a certain extent. It's cleaning everything every day. It's overseeing the entire POA, picking trash up there as needed. It's cleaning the restrooms. It's paying for the water, the electric, etc. I mean, go on and on. So we've adjusted that agreement through time because there's not a concession operation. So there's, and I'm more than happy to try to work through ways to make this work for everybody.
Is it a room on there that they have a concession stand?
I'm sorry,
Is there a room on there that could have a concession in it?
well,
Serve food?
this area is 480 square feet, and it doesn't have any kitchen facilities. You really need a hood over top of the
I know
cooking
what it
area,
is.
a grease trap. It's not set up for that with electric and all. It doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's going to take an investment to get it done. And then that's why I have the concession consultant involved. He's been involved since 2013. So he's looked at it and he's given us two scenarios that he believes are possible. One is that we create a kitchen area in the back. There would no longer be an office space there. Right now it's got two little rooms in the back, one for storage and one for an office. So you get rid of the office and the storage and make that a kitchen area. And you put as many tables and chairs in that room as possible and expand out onto the deck and maybe even put some pavers out in the grass area and put up some tables and chairs for good weather, maybe, some benches with some umbrellas for good weather. So that's fine, provided the weather's good and there's not a lot of mosquitoes. But the bulk, the good weather, the poor weather seating is going to be very limited, and it's going to be hard to generate much revenue from that. So it's possible, but it's going to take an investment. If the hood and everything was there, I'd say we'd try to make it work. We could make it work. But to spend $25,000 to $30,000 out of your pocket, it's going to be a challenge. It depends on how everything else works out here.
But concessions was a part of the RFP.
Pardon me?
But concessions was a part of the RFP.
It was. And that's what our response, the revenues back to the city were much more because we were basing them off of those numbers. And so we went from the RFP has a potential for a mooring field, and that's, again, can be revenue to the city and to the operator. There's not a mooring field. There's supposed to be 2 water taxis. There's one.
What's a mooring field?
That's where those boats that just anchor anywhere they want, it's like in St. Augustine, they designate where, if you're a transient boater, a traveling boater, you either pay for one of the slips at the dock, the floating slips, and with that comes the use of the ship's floor, where they can take showers, do their laundry, things like that. There would be a computer, a sofa, a TV. They can get off their boat a little bit. And then they pay for that per night. And that's typically somewhere around $1 per foot. So it's a 30-foot boat would pay you $30 a night for room there. And then, and if you don't choose to do that and you want to stay on your boat in a pocket area, you would anchor in the designated area. There's actually buoys that we would put in. You have a company that helps put those in. And you just pull your boat up and clip onto it, and that's a mooring buoy, and then there's a charge for that, but it's not a lot. But you do that, if I could, you do that for a couple reasons, because with that comes free pump out service. So we have a pump out system at the docks where...
There's one out there, down there.
Yes, but you require the boats, if they're going to anchor in front of the city of Palatka, they have to use mooring buoys, and that puts somebody in control and make sure that they use the pump out system. Because if not, you do have people that just dump their sewage into the water. And so that's part of what our responsibility would be.
Any questions? So we've kind of heard, I guess that's the first thing we can talk about, it seems like, so we can kind of direct this. The length of the agreement, let's start there.
5 to 7.
1.
5 to 7.
And so the 21 years at this point. And so, any thoughts or concerns from the commission? We've kind of heard from the consultants the last time they were here as to what they perceive as industry standards for length of time as it related to agreements. I heard Commissioner Boer would say 5 to 7 years.
But then we still got to talk about the amount, which will also factor in the overall cost, which we need to talk about the cost.
And the 5 to 7 years is in the city attorney's
Recommendation,
recommendation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And so again, we've heard 5 to 7. We've got the
amount.
21 based upon renewables. Any thoughts, concerns, conversations as it relates to the numbers? I know Mr. Lagacy's kind of indicated that in order for him to make the capital investment and do some other things, term of years is a very significant thing. And I think, starting specifically as it relates to term of years to see if there's a range for the discussion, we go from there.
Mayor, can I make one comment? And I don't need to interject too much, but I sort of, in discussion with staff, the thought that I had was this would be most like our golf course agreement in that it's a resource that the city owns, unique. We don't have more than one of it, that being the riverfront. And I looked at or thought about our golf course agreement, which again is for 5 or 7 years, Jonathan.
I think that's correct, yes, sir.
But it has options.
5-year agreement.
5-year agreement. Again, that's some of the same considerations that Mr. Lagacy had mentioned. The operator or franchisee is investing time and money in improving the golf course and trying to develop business and clientele, like Mr. Lagacy would be doing. So it's not that I don't recognize the fact that there's a startup benefit that the city's getting from Mr. Lagacy's efforts. It's just that you're going to have to decide whether or not you're comfortable in going 21 years or longer than the 5 or 7. But at the same time, as you read the little memo, I recognize that there may be a benefit in not just stating it's a flat 5 or 7 year agreement, but instead providing that it wouldn't be automatically renewable. And at the end of that term, there'd be a mandatory renegotiation clause that stated that we negotiate with Mr. Lagacy to examine where the city is, where he is at that point. Maybe you fine-tune some terms. Maybe you can't fine-tune them. Maybe they're not acceptable. The whole thing's just not a workable deal for him. Maybe it's not for the city. But I understand that I don't have the benefit of the consultant's knowledge about how everybody else, all the other cities do waterfronts. But from my perspective, the thought of binding the city to 21 years in a contract that you can't get out of unless Mr. Lagacy breaches, that he can walk away from with 90 days notice if he decides it's not financially feasible for him. There's just something about that's tough for an attorney to digest when I represent the party that can't get out of the agreement. So maybe that's just the way it works in the world, but it'd be, it does seem like some basic inequity about that, where we're stuck for 21 years, but he can at any point in time say, guys, this has been fun, but not working out too good for me. I'm not really making the money I thought I would, so in 90 days I'm walking away. And maybe that's an overstatement. Maybe it's an unfair characterization. But if so, I'm willing for somebody to help me understand why that's not a disadvantage for the city.
And I think that's the other thing I'll say. I'll give you a chance. I know in previous conversations with the PBM, we discussed kind of what the standards were that the commission set as related to contracts. On general contracts, leases and things of that nature, 3 to 5 years have been kind of the standard that we set. If you can recall, with the Cooper Center, I think we went to 5 years based upon just air conditioning. This contract it would have significantly more at stake and invested compared to that. So I don't have much by way of angst at least having a conversation at the 5 to 7 year mark based upon the recommendations that are in there. But I do think that that's just the tip of the iceberg as far as it gets to discussing this contract. But we've it seems as though we've set a standard as to where we want to be as far as terms and looking at renewability of contracts, all those other things. But that's still something that the commission as a whole has to think about and at least give some guidance as to where we go on that particular issue. Mr. Langston.
So I was just going to suggest that, so I haven't worked with any other municipalities in a serious situation like this, so I don't know what the norm is other than what the consultant says, and I trust him because he's done this for a long time. So it's obviously not uncommon, and I'm not asking for the city to lock something in for 21 years. What I am asking is that the first term is 7 years, and that it be renewable for meeting those expectations that the city sets out. And then it's renewable again, because I'll just be very frank with you. For me to go in and spend the next 2.5 to 3 years to get to break even, spend a lot of marketing dollars to drive people to that business so it will pay for itself, and then have 3 more years where I can maybe recoup most of the money I've invested, which is not a light amount, based on what I pay. I'm going to pay for washers, dryers, and I believe that's 4, 2 washers, 2 dryers, a couch, TVs, computer. Basically, we have to outfit the whole ship store and the boaters lounge, along with I'm going to go out and invest in a couple $100,000 worth of rental boats, which I'm fortunate that I could take them next door to my marina and continue operations there possibly. But there's a substantial marketing investment as well. So I look at it as more as it's a lease. You guys, you have an infrastructure. It's not what you agreed it was going to be. You're saying we're going to lease this infrastructure to you. You come build your business, and I'm asking for the lease to be renewable. Is all I'm asking for. Is there a way that I could break the lease if I can't, if I'm not profitable, and if it's not 90 days, let's adjust it to something else. But if we get to the point where we can't make this thing work, then we need to revisit it. But if we do make it work and we're making money for the city, I want the ability to renew that lease for another term. That's normal business. If you go rent a restaurant location, you're going to have a lease with renewable terms, or you're not going to go build a brand at a restaurant.
So what's the city's escape clause if we find ourselves in a situation where we're not profitable? We don't have the same option on the 90 days as you do.
I think we ought to look at where you would be profitable. So I haven't seen the numbers where when this thing, I tell you, if I'm making money, the city's making money, or I won't be there, so the city will be losing money.
How's the city making money?
Year 1, we don't make nothing.
Okay, so, well, and I'd have to refresh my memory on the agreement. I didn't get a chance to read it today.
0.
The city makes money off of the water taxi, money off of profits from the water taxi. It gets a monthly fee for the use of the facility, the building. It gets profits from the rental of the rental boats as well, even though we're paying for rental boats. It may not sound like a lot, but it is. It's 2% of the gross. So every boat rental that we do, and you've got a $35,000 boat that you rent out. There's a lot of cost involved with that, and personnel and maintenance on the boat. The city, right off the top of that, whatever that rental amount is, they're going to get 2% of that. You don't have to worry about paying for it, so I have to pay for that. It's really a lot larger percentage than that when you look at the net.
I'm going to ask you, I hear you talk about washers and dryers, you could not put them in the facility that you own already, so that you wouldn't have to worry about whether you were going to be there or not?
Yes, ma'am, we could, but the RFP requires that we put them in the voters lounge at the new building.
Okay, so if we took that out and let you put them, you can't. But see, that's what I'm saying, we got rid of this stuff. What is
You
that?
didn't get rid of the RFP. That's the thing. The RFP still remains.
Okay,
Go ahead.
that's why we got rid of them.
The RFP did not state that the furnishings had to stay with the building if they terminated the lease agreement, so the lessee could take the furnishings with them if that was spelled out in the agreement.
But I guess when I look at the projections, and this is, and all of it's kind of speculative, because we're talking about creating an emerging market. The projections are showing roughly $70,000 invested the first year from the city's perspective, $60,000 on average every year then after, with revenues coming in between $1,800 to $5,300 over the course of that 5-year period. And I'm sure that all those numbers are conservative. I'm hoping that they're conservative, which means that they can either go up or down. Just using basic math, it's a loser for the city at the rate of about $60,000 a year. Based on projections, unless you outperform everything that's put in place by 15-fold. And that's the part for me that becomes most difficult. Are these projections based on us just having one boat in operation, or is this based upon having delivered the second boat delivered? Sure.
All right, and so I'm not looking at my projections, and I apologize, but I just got this, and I haven't studied the city's cost as well, but, so that's based on one boat. It's very conservative, and we can, I have, and I've offered the perform to everybody. It's workable, and I'm happy to, if we had more time, we could pull it up on the screen, and we could run through the numbers so the city can understand where the costs are and what the upside is. Those numbers are very conservative from the rental boat side, from the water taxi side, but I had to do them that way because if we do this, I'm not going to fail. I never fail at anything I do. I'm not going to start now. So I've got a lot of skin in this game. I stayed in it for 4 years, but I also want to be realistic. And I see the first thing I see is when you're talking the $70,000 the first year, well, we got $10,000 in there on boat improvements that were supposed to be taken care of when the boat was built. So that shouldn't go against my operations.
And we understand. And that boat didn't come with everything that was promised.
Right. And then you got signage. There's a lot of things that are ongoing here. So if we go to year 2, and I'd like to study this and review it, but dock maintenance, I'm surprised that there'd be 10,000 dock maintenance, and I think we can help cut your cleaning staff down. We're willing to clean the restrooms, but we're just saying the restrooms need to get cleaned more than once a day. And if the city had somebody who just stop by on during their normal work schedule, they're out and about, they could stop by and clean the restrooms once a day, that would help us to lighten our requirements for personnel.
So let's transition for sake of so that we can kind of hit the big items. So first thing is, we talked about 5 to 7 years. You said that you would be okay with 7 as a point, and then renewability, it's something that maybe conversation comes up with as to whether it's renegotiable renewal or something to that effect, and then is that something that the commission can live with? And as a starting point, not committing to anything, but just from 5 to 7 as a range for negotiations.
I would have to know that if we, excuse me, just so, because I don't want you guys to misunderstand. If we got to 7 years and you guys said, well, it's 5 to 7, if you guys said, we're putting this back out for RFP for, we want to open it up to everybody, I really would not be interested in making investment at this point. Because I can't, I'm not going to make any money between now and 5 years.
Okay.
So he's still saying automatic.
So
Okay.
I hear his point, but I guess tied into the term of years also is also the POA. So I think a critical part of what's tied in is what's the operating area. And I think that part is the part that drives costs. It drives costs from the standpoint of employees. It drives costs. So when you talk operating area and exclusivity, I think those are the things, to me, that become the drivers. So, because the term came out earlier is that not giving the riverfront to you for a term of years to just have exclusive use. And you said also that you didn't want it.
We want it. That was one of the responsibilities of the entire riverfront, never did.
So let me just shift gears because we've only got a few minutes, and I'm pretty sure that we're not going to come close to finishing any of this today. When we talk from the standpoint of operating area, what is the desired operating area for PBM?
So what we've requested is, or what the
Did you look at Jonathan's sketch, just so we can be a little bit more specific? Did you look at Jonathan's diagram?
and that's the one in red?
Yes, it is.
Did you work with him on that, right?
No, I just.
No, that's the recommendation from there.
We just got this at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
We just tried to put together something so we could talk with some specificity and not be talking about, well, somewhere down around where the playground is. So this is just a first step and said, guys, here's something.
You got the specific
Change it like
area.
you want to.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so our expectations and what we've worked with Jonathan on through the years is the RP requires us to maintain at a minimum the floating docks, because that's part of the grant. It ties to the boaters lounge. And so what we requested was the outdoor space immediately around the building, so we could have, we have to create some kind of canoe and kayak storage.
Right.
We asked for a soft launch, and I'd like to rediscuss that at some point, but a soft launch that is immediately in front of the building between in the red area. So it would be, if you could see between the shore and the red floating docks, that's a protected, semi-protected area, except for when you get extreme wind and weather out of the direct north.
Not last September.
That changed after Irma.
Yeah. So, but we do have a soft launch on the north end already, an existing soft launch on the north end, right?
But if there's a way we can do a soft launch here without having to take out the seawall, we're not asking to remove the seawall.
Jonathan, is this on a program that you can give to Ms. Curry and Mr. Legassi? We have our sort of red line outline of proposed POA. Do you have the same sort of diagram or aerial that you can make available to them so they can draw their own red line on it?
Yes, I did this on Google Maps, so if Scott has Google Maps account, I can share it with him and he can move columns just like I can.
Okay.
And I'd like to see where the lines too, where you're gonna put them.
So maybe
Will it
that's-
affect our,
Hey,
I got to see, I'm talking about where, the area he would like to
The
have.
soft launch.
if you can
Yeah.
send those in.
It's right in front of that square where the building is here.
All right, I drew me a line. I drew me a line right there from here, because I figured, yeah.
You're right in front of the building, right?
And actually, I'm not sure if you realize, this is an older map, so that building on there is the older building. The new building's not shown on here, but it's within that.
Right.
That's right.
We understand that. So maybe you guys could come up with your own map and show us.
What you want?
Well, otherwise we're going to be doing what we just tried to do, which is draw our own lines, and then somebody's line's not going to be where somebody thought their line was, and so maybe you guys could come up with the line. We started with something and said, we just tried to come up with a minimum, and the minimum outlines the 2 docks on the north end of the riverfront, the transient docks, I guess they are, and then it outlines the docks that are right by the boat ramp and the boat ramps themselves in the area upland. So maybe you guys could come up with your own diagram.
And just for our next, and just for sake of for the next meeting, so that everyone in the audience and in TV land can follow us, can we have the slides up for this so that it kind of makes sense to other folks in the audience as well? Yeah. So,
Can I explain
Yes, ma'am.
a couple of the caps so that they
Yes.
understand whenever they walk away? So I just wanted you to understand that the expenditure caps on the expense page, what I mean by caps is that that is not truly the expense cost. That is what we're proposing to have a cap negotiated. That way we will, the city will cover up to those amounts for those top 5 lines, I believe it is. And then the city, and these are all spelled out per your contract that you, or the agreement, we went line by line or paragraph by paragraph.
Your proposal, those were the costs that you wanted the city to bear.
That you wanted the city to bear per your agreement, correct? The second where it says pay will fluctuate, this is the city will pay regardless of the amount, so therefore there will not be a cap on it, it will be the cost. That's the land lease, the cleaning staff, it's at $20,000. Really, a part-time employee at $11 an hour, $16,000 with benefits, is roughly $19,000, but you can see that down at the bottom where it goes up by 5% each year. And then the boat insurance, which is, you know, obviously it will fluctuate also, and it will go up by year 5. If you do a 5%, it's going to go up to 7.5. But then if you look at the city revenue, we also did this per your agreement about the 5% gross, 3%, 2% gross, and then water taxis is a net. Therefore, you have gross receipts minus all of your costs, which included promotion, advertisement, general maintenance, your captain costs. Therefore, that's why whenever it says 0, after you net everything, the first 5 years, we're probably not going to see any revenue from that. You also see I took out the rent revenue because there is a statement in your agreement that depending on what we decide to do with the concessions, we could be crediting you up to $30,000, which means no rent for us for 5 years, depending on which option you decide to go with. So of course these are conservative, it's worst case scenario, maybe, it's a guess at best, but I just wanted to clarify some of those things, that it is per your agreement how we came up with some of these numbers.
For instance, you mentioned a minute ago that you weren't asking us to clean the bathrooms, but in your proposal, you are asking us to clean the bathrooms.
Right.
So if there's a change there, then our numbers would change, but we tried to track your proposal as best we could. And even if you look at your RFP, Scott, the numbers you project in terms of revenue, other than for the boat slips, when you get them 50% occupied, there's no number there that's big from the city's perspective in terms of revenue from your proposal when you did the original. So no one was trying to...
There was a decent amount of money coming back from the concession operation, because that was 3, then 4, then 5%.
Yeah, you're right.
Of the concession operation. So
Correct.
I think the projections for year 3.5 are starting to get pretty good.
And that'll speak to your, when you say that you don't see much the first 5 years, this speaks to, these projections speak to that, so.
I gotta ask you a question. Those boats have to be pulled out every 5 years, I think. Is that right? Every so many years? And yeah, they told us the boats have to be pulled out and they go and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so the holes need to be cleaned and maintenance, and we have them scheduled every 2 years right now.
Okay, so who would pay, is that included in the numbers that we get in here, or?
Maintenance.
Was
We are setting some money aside. I have to look at the numbers to see what it is. I think we're setting aside enough, expecting to spend about $2,500 a year before we go out, clean the hole and put it back in.
Well, see, that was one of the things that we had looked at in before, that you all would pay, give us enough that we made sure that that was done, because that's required by
And I don't see it included in the agreement.
those people, and that's something that you have to do. So,
we're at 5:15. We've got a couple options. We can take a recess, we can take a recess and address our 5:15 meeting, which hopefully won't take very long. Or we can reschedule this to address everything, because we really haven't addressed much.
I think that is some things that he wanted to review, that would give him enough time to review it, especially the map and some of the things that we just also got today. So I think that'll be fair if he was given the opportunity, and that's the opportunity as well based on the information that we just received. I do believe that we got a good history lesson. Some of that I did know and some of that I did not know, and that's some things to take into consideration as well.
Quick question.
So have a meeting on another day?
Quick question as it relates to exclusivity, which is one thing we didn't talk about, exclusive use. Is there some room for movement on the exclusive uses? I know you kind of named everything under the sun. We talked a little bit about this. But is there some flexibility as it relates to the POA?
Yes, and would you be saying there would be competing businesses in the same things within the POA?
I would. So my question is, so you've named pretty much every activity that you can do on water or at a riverfront as part of the exclusive use that you have over your 21-year period, which basically creates, in my mind, a monopoly of sorts as it relates to that particular area. So are you in any way willing to limit the activities to those in which to certain activities within a set period or within a defined area? Because at some point, I think ultimately, if you've got a monopoly on tour boats coming into the riverfront, for example, and there's another company that's coming in that's doing a different type of tour, and your demand you can't meet. We don't want to be limited to being able to bring in those additional things to meet the needs of the city or to bring tourists in.
Okay. Yeah, and most of those items, I don't know when that was adjusted last, but most of that was the way it's been since Michael was here. Since we started, and there was no concern or questions about it back then, so I hadn't thought about that. We put everything in there that we could think of that we could potentially generate revenue from to help pay for the overhead of the operation and to make money, obviously, and to make money for the city. So I'll go back and study those, and we would certainly want, I wouldn't say exclusivity, but we would certainly want a non-compete on the key items. So if we're going to spend the marketing dollars up front to drive people here to rent boats, for instance, or water taxi boat, I want to protect the water taxi, and I think the city would want to as well, so that the city makes good money off the water taxi once we cover the base of operations.
I would like to say, the reason that we got those water taxis was to try to encourage more businesses to come here. So think about that too. Not that they be in competition with you, but things that, like throwing a pebble in a pond, that they would come from what we have here.
Right. Sure.
Staff has had a lot of discussion about this, and I just wanted to thank Ms. Becker and Mr. Griffith and Mr. Holmes and everyone else, because we've had a lot of discussion about this. One of the things that we did look at on the exclusivity is how it would affect special events. If you have 100% control over everything that goes on down there, and we have to consider that. There are a lot of special events down there, a lot of bass tournaments, and so that was we tried to look at the extreme scenario on everything.
And I don't think that was our intention. Our intention was to make sure that we didn't have to close the operation down during special events. Right. Because you have employees, you have a business you're trying to run, and those special events happen to be on weekends and holidays when we're out marketing around not just
weekends and holidays.
We're trying to drag people here. If we have to close the doors and people can't get to us, then that,
You would think people would want to come and buy food and stuff.
Yeah.
And if they came in, they want to buy stuff.
Yeah, so we want to control the area.
Yeah.
Commissioner Board.
Yeah, my only concern was the 7-year deal, and we really haven't came up with a number, because if we're going to be looking at $60,000 a year, it's basically a trial. Nobody knows how much money it is. We're sitting at $420,000. In base, we're going to be $350,000 to $420,000. Do we have that money in our coffer to be able to expend that? We didn't have it in none of the line items as it was a budget item.
Definitely have to do a budget amendment to ensure that it's in the budget.
Right. So we got to talk about that. And the 3 months, I wasn't comfortable with the 3 months out, and I wouldn't mind doing a base. Once we come up with a real number, a good number that we all agree on, 5-year base, 1 year renewables to up to 7. But you would probably need to put a little more skin in the game as it relates to 3 months out. You would at least put a 1 year in, so we can have a time enough to plan if something happens. That's my take.
The sad reality is that it's really hard to force someone to continue an operation that is costing them a lot of money. I mean force them, I mean go to court, try to make them continue to operate, because the first answer from them is, we don't have the money to do it. And a court really doesn't have the power to make somebody find money. You understand what I'm saying? As far as the 90-day out thing, I understand that. I understand that. I was just concerned about us not having any way to look at it from our perspective and say, well, this is costing us a lot more money than we thought. That's why we came up with the cap proposal, the cap idea of, well, okay, if you guys look at it and say, okay, we're prepared to put 60 grand a year in this for 5 years. And that's a cap, which according to, Mr. Lagasse, he's very optimistic, and he thinks that we're going to be making money after a couple of years, in which case the cap wouldn't be a factor, because we could be offsetting revenue. But if you knew that was the most you were going to have in it, and you were prepared to go ahead and incur that cost for the sake of making this thing move, then at least that would give us something to offset the idea that you're going to be stuck with it for a period of time. But that period of time, then as we said, it might be just the 7. Right now, well, I'll leave it at that. I think we have some ideas. Maybe Miss Curry and I can get together with some exchanges before the next meeting, and maybe come up with some language that we might be able to suggest. I don't know, but we can try that.
Right. I mean, and I think one thing is we've got to dedicate some time, because this isn't, you can tell from the history lesson we got today, this is something that's been ongoing since 1985 at least.
1999.
That's 85 to me. So
1999.
That's $4.99.
I was in law school.
$4.99.
A long
But
time.
the money came in 1985.
But you're talking almost 2 decades.
Yes.
So you're talking almost 2 decades of energy placed into a vision. You're talking we're talking 5 years of trying to make vision a reality through grants and through other opportunities and through RFPs. And we just got to dedicate some time to it so that we can actually start to deal with the things. And it's kind of this is the time where we actually should get bogged down in the weeds, because it's the details that will be the devil in this particular situation, making sure that we identify all the areas that will be potential places of controversy if things aren't optimal, and also potential places of revenue. And I think when we get into that particular thought process, we start to deal with some of the stuff. I think the dialogue today was good, because it at least put some mindset as to where we can move forward. And I think we know, what's the bare minimum for Mr. Lagasse. We know what the thoughts are from the commission as it relates to terms. We know that from exclusivity, there's some negotiating points from the POA, the operating area. There's some movement. There's a place that you don't want to be. There's some employees that you don't want to have in place. And there's some things that it seems like the commissions may not necessarily be willing to give up from a land perspective. But optimally, we hope that we can get to a point where we can come to some mutual agreement as it relates. So next steps.
When we're looking at your schedules, there are several things that we need to get ironed out prior to budget adoption. This is, of course, going to be one of them. And we are supposed to be holding a CRA workshop, and then we have to call a CRA meeting.
I don't think the budget's going to be, I don't think
Yeah.
a budget workshop is going to even help us with it. This is probably going to be something that we don't
The
learn.
workshop is a CRA.
Yeah, well, what I'll say is that I don't think that we should rush into that. We
Right.
can always do an amendment. We don't need to rush this just for the sake of adopting a budget to make sure, because as far as we're concerned, these are guesstimates
Right.
regardless, and we're gonna have to do amendment after amendment until we get this thing kind of ironed out.
Right.
So I would suggest not to rush on behalf of trying to make a deadline for the budget. We can do an amendment.
And because we're not pulling reserves out of the budget to deal
Right.
with the
Right.
issues we've got, we can always make amendments and add an additional line item if necessary.
Also, it's the revenue percentage payments are begin a year after the official open date, which is defined in the agreement. Therefore, it is more of an expense-related thing versus the revenue, so it would just be a pure amendment.
Right.
So the only thing that we're looking at prior to the 13th is going to be the CRA workshop, which we need to hold prior to the 13th, the one that you all requested. and then we have to call a special CRA meeting. We're probably going to have to do that on the 13th, because that's got to be advertised 7 days in advance.
I think that was the plan
Yeah.
going into it.
So would you all like to hold a separate date for the CRA workshop, which is going to cover 3 items, right, Mr. Griffith? Or just do it all on the 13th?
No, I mean, let's keep the CRA workshop and the CRA meeting on the same day.
Okay.
And then let's find another date that's mutually agreeable for this, and then we can just try to coordinate with the PBM and the city to make sure that we get enough time in place to deal with it, and so that we can actually kind of go in place. And I think a good thing that can happen in the interim is kind of having council communicate along with staff and see if we can come up with at least some concessions that we may be able to bring back, which may move the process a little bit further. Yes, sir.
I would suggest while we're doing that, so that we don't run into things that we tend to run into quite frequently, if we could set a deadline as to if there is anything that we as a commission or anyone else need to see, that we have ample enough time to do, that we have ample enough time to see, ask questions, or do whatever we need to do. I don't want to run into the instance of coming into a meeting and we just got information that may be pertinent to the decisions that we need to make.
And I agree.
So let's.
Well, we're continuing to talk right up until the meeting.
I know, but I'm just saying, if there's something,
Just don't come out.
Sometimes an hour before.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you're right.
But I think, but I think for the most part, if we got a working document, let's, if we can get it out close enough so at least the shell is there, that kind of works.
Any idea about the other boat, the bond people?
Nobody has an idea about the other boats.
Tried to force that, and we just started the litigation about that. So we got the deposition scheduled in November.
So that we, our side doesn't hold
Hold on 1
things
second.
up. Who do we communicate with? Like, I'd like to talk to somebody about some of the city costs and go into the agreement and see how some of that stuff can get moved around. But do we delay everything until the next meeting, or is there somebody that we should be communicating with as we're trying to work through and refine the agreement?
Looks like the team right now consists of Ms. Becker, Ms. Griffith, and Tucker, and also Ms. Driggers and Mr. Holmes.
So we can just do an email on those items so we can keep it moving?
And I know previously the commission also gave me the ability to sit in those meetings with you guys. So, but I think if you communicate through Ms. Driggers and Griffith and Becker, and Holmes will be fine. So who wants to be? So I would think that the point person, since we've got council involved, will be council, and then everything else can be directed from there.
Listen, ladies, we really had wanted to make sure to help with the advertisement and stuff. Our group, y'all done waited till almost all of them died but me. But it's still people who would be happy to work, because we did a lot of legwork to try to get to make sure it would work.
So, again, thank you guys for coming here on short notice.
Yeah, it would help us if we have more notice. I was out of town all last week and we weren't prepared, so.
We'll make sure. Ms. Driggers is kind of doing double duty. She'll give you some some lag time this time. But again, thank you for coming in here and being pretty candid with everything that's in place, and also working with us to try to resolve these issues as it relates to this agreement. Thank you to staff for all the work that you've done as it relates to what's going on. And we thank you guys in the audience for your patience, because we're about 15 minutes over our allotted time on this meeting. We won't have closing comments from the commission. We'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting until a time that we've dedicated to it.